Nashville, Tennessee. Present day. 3 sharp knocks shatter the silence of my apartment. My name is April Jennings, and I have been waiting 7 years for this exact sound. On the other side of the door stand the people who killed my son, not with a weapon, but with a refusal. They think they are here to beg a wealthy stranger for salvation. They have forgotten that they once chose a flower wall over a child's heartbeat. They sacrificed us for their legacy, but tonight, I am the one holding the pen. They tried to erase me, so I decided to rewrite their ending. Join me as I settle the score. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. 3 sharp, authoritative knocks echoed through my apartment, shattering the quiet hum of the evening. I didn't need to ask who it was. I knew that rhythm. It was the sound of a man who believed the world existed solely to open doors for him. I muted the television set, my tea on the quartz countertop, and walked calmly to the door. Through the peephole, the distorted fisheye view revealed them, Marcus and Denise Jennings. My parents. They looked out of place in the hallway of my Nashville building, dressed in their Sunday best. My father in a 3-piece suit that seemed a size too large for his shrinking frame, my mother clutching her designer purse like a shield. They were composed, but I saw the tremor in my mother's hands and the sheen of sweat on my father's forehead. They looked desperate. 7 years ago, they ambushed me in a hospital corridor, with their decisions shattering my life with the cool detachment of a business transaction. Tonight, I had been waiting for this knock. I unlocked the deadbolt, the metal sliding back with a heavy thud, but I didn't open the door just yet. I let them wait. The last time I begged them for help, they chose my sister's wedding over my son's life. Now they were here to beg me. To understand why I left them standing in the hallway for those extra 10 seconds, you have to understand the Jennings brand. I grew up in a sprawling, manicured suburb of Atlanta, the kind of place where the grass is measured with a ruler and the neighbors watch you from behind plantation shutters. We were a pillar of the black middle class, God-fearing, respectable, and obsessed with optics. My father Marcus was a deacon and the owner of a successful chain of auto dealerships. My mother Denise was the perennial chairwoman of every charity gala and PTA board in the county. In our house, family wasn't about love, it was about legacy. It was about standing up straight, speaking the King's English, and never ever airing dirty laundry. We were raised on a diet of resilience and pull-yourself-up rhetoric. I believed it too. I swallowed the lie that if you worked hard and followed the rules, the community would hold you up. I did everything right, or so I thought. I became a nurse, dedicating myself to healing others. But I also made the mistake of marrying young to a man named Tyler Brooks, a charming musician with a smile that could melt glaciers and a work ethic that didn't exist. By the time I was 25, I was divorced, exhausted, and raising the love of my life. Noah. Noah was 6 years old, a sweet, messy-haired boy who could name every dinosaur in the Cretaceous period, but was too shy to ask for extra ketchup at a diner. I worked double shifts at the hospital, picking up every scrap of overtime, saving every dollar, feeling like I had already sacrificed my youth just to keep a roof over our heads. My parents didn't see the sacrifice. They saw the stain. To them, Noah wasn't a grandson to be spoiled. He was April's problem, a living reminder of my failed marriage and poor judgment. They tolerated him at holidays, offering stiff hugs and critiques on his table manners, but the warmth was never there. They subtly threatened to pull their emotional support whenever I missed a church service or couldn't afford the right dress for a banquet. Lacey, my younger sister, was different. Lacey was the golden child, Instagram perfect, groomed from birth to marry wealth and secure the family's social climb. Then the bottom fell out. It started with Noah getting winded walking up the stairs. Then came the bruises on his shins that wouldn't heal and the fevers that spiked in the night. I was a nurse. I knew how to read signs, but denial is a powerful drug. When he collapsed at the park, the denial vanished. The diagnosis was a sledgehammer, a rare degenerative heart defect. The structural repair required a specialized surgeon, and a procedure considered experimental by my bare-bones insurance policy. I sat in the doctor's office, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry hornets as the financial coordinator slid a piece of paper across the desk. The out-of-pocket cost to secure the specialist and the post-op care was $85,000. It might as well have been $85 million. I felt the world tilt on its axis. I thought the worst day of my life had already happened when Tyler walked out on us. Turns out that was just the warm-up. I left the ICU that night and went to the hospital chapel, not to pray, but to think. The room was silent, smelling of floor wax and old Bibles. I sat in the back pew, my hands shaking in my lap. I ran the numbers in my head 1,000 times, but the math never changed. I didn't have it. But I knew who did. My parents had just booked a vineyard in Napa for Lacey's wedding. They were talking about custom flower walls and live orchestras. They tithed more than my annual salary. They preached about family sticking together, about the sanctity of blood. I wiped my face with the rough sleeve of my scrubs and stood up. I would go to them. I would lay it all out. They were image-obsessed, yes, and cold certainly, but they were grandparents. They wouldn't let Noah die over money. I told myself, they're my parents. They won't erase me, not when it's Noah. I didn't know yet how wrong I was. I didn't even change out of my scrubs. I drove like a maniac to the St. Regis in Buckhead, parking my rusted sedan between a Bentley and a Porsche, ignoring the valet's sneer as I tossed him my keys. My parents were in the VIP tasting room surrounded by velvet drapes and crystal stemware, finalizing the menu for Lacey's reception. When I burst in breathless and smelling of hospital antiseptic and fear, the contrast was violent. My mother was holding a spoon of lobster bisque to her lips. My father was swirling a glass of amber cognac, laughing at something the catering manager said. They looked like royalty. I looked like a wreck. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I laid it out right there over the pristine white tablecloth. Noah's heart, the surgery, the $85,000, the deadline that was ticking down like a bomb. I expected shock. I expected my mother to drop her spoon. Instead, my father set his glass down with a slow, deliberate clink. He looked at me not as a father looking at a grieving daughter, but as a CEO looking at a bad quarterly report. He started talking about ROI and risk assessment. He explained that their liquidity was currently tied up in vendor deposits and venue fees for the wedding. My mother chimed in, her voice trembling not with worry for Noah, but with anxiety about the Whitfields. "We have a responsibility to this family's image, April," she whispered, glancing at the door as if the wealthy in-laws were listening. "Lacey's wedding is our chance to secure all our futures. We can't just liquidate everything because you made poor decisions." Poor decisions, I choked out, falling to my knees on the plush carpet. I was literally begging. "This is Noah, this is a life." But Marcus remained unmoved. He told me they had already sacrificed so much to build this life, to get to this room, to this level of society. He threatened to cut me off completely if I kept making scenes and weaponizing Noah's illness to guilt us. My mother offered to pray. "God will provide," she said, smoothing her silk skirt. "But we cannot jeopardize the wedding." The next 3 weeks were a blur of nausea and desperation. While I worked triple shifts, sold my furniture, and pawned my wedding ring, the Jennings family group chat remained a relentless, cheerful torment. My phone would buzz in my pocket while I was wiping down Noah's feverish body. I'd check it hoping for a change of heart, a miracle transfer of funds. Instead, it was photos of cake tastings. It was videos of Lacey twirling in a custom gown. It was a mock-up of a neon sign reading "The Whitfields." Every notification was a slap in the face. Lacey was posting hashtags, #blessed, #forever Whitfield, while I was eating vending machine crackers for dinner, so I could save $5. Every time my phone lit up, it wasn't help. It was updates on the party they'd sacrificed my child for. The night before the rehearsal dinner, Noah crashed. The alarms in the ICU were deafening. I called Lacey on FaceTime, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. I needed them to see him. I needed them to understand what was happening while they drank champagne. Lacey answered, her face shiny and orange, sitting in a salon chair getting a spray tan. When I turned the camera to show Noah hooked to the ventilator, she didn't cry. She hissed. "April, don't ambush me with this," she snapped, checking her nails. "You're killing my vibe. Do you want Mom having a panic attack before my big day? If it's his time, it's his time. Don't ruin everything we've worked for." The call ended. The word everything hung in the air. Everything meant the flowers, the wine, the image. It didn't include us. Noah died in the quiet gray hours of the early morning. There was no miracle, no last-minute check. I was reading him a book about triceratops when the monitor simply stopped its rhythmic beeping and flattened into a solid tone. He slipped away while my family was sleeping off the rehearsal dinner in luxury suites 3 time zones away. I walked out to the hospital parking lot, the dawn air cold against my skin, and called my father. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep and a hangover. I told him Noah was gone. There was a pause. Then he sighed an irritated sound. "Don't you dare threaten this wedding with drama, April," he said. "Handle it quietly. We'll deal with it after the honeymoon." Before I could scream, a text came through from my mother. "We can't come home. The Whitfields are already here. Don't make this about you. Bury him quietly. We'll visit when it's less sensitive." In one sentence, my own parents tried to erase him, and erase me. The funeral was 2 days later. It was a tiny, grim affair in a local cemetery, just me and a sympathetic hospital chaplain standing over a small hole in the ground. At the exact moment the earth hit the casket, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out numb. It was an Instagram notification. My mother had posted a photo of the wedding fireworks exploding over a vineyard, Lacey and Evan kissing, my parents beaming in the background. The caption read, "Most important day of my life. #perfect family. Blessed." Standing over that tiny grave, staring at the lie on the screen, something inside me snapped and hardened. I made a promise to the dirt covering my son. They used their money to erase my son. I would use my pain to erase the life they built on his grave. I didn't wait for the funeral flowers to wilt. I blocked their numbers. Mom, Dad, Lacey, even the house landline, and packed a single suitcase. I left the rest of my life in Atlanta on the curb, just like they had left me. I drove north on I-75, watching the city that had suffocated me disappear in the rearview mirror. I chose Nashville, not because I knew anyone there, but because it was a city of ghosts and gamblers, a place where people came to be someone else, where reinvention is just called Tuesday. As I crossed the state line, I made a vow to the empty passenger seat. If my own family could discard me like a used napkin, I owed them nothing. Not a call, not a text, not a warning. I would become a ghost. The first year was a blur of caffeine and cold fury. I leaned hard on the values they had drilled into me: resilience, grit, the Protestant work ethic, but I stripped away the need for their approval. I started working in a chaotic inner-city ICU, pulling double shifts until my feet bled, hoarding cash like a dragon. But being a nurse wasn't enough. I saw it every day, families destroyed not by illness, but by the bill that came after. I watched good people get crushed by the system, just like I had been crushed by my parents. Slowly, my empathy calcified into strategy. I began to learn the machinery of the enemy. I studied hospital finance, learned how debt was packaged and sold, and discovered how fragile a reputation truly was in the age of the internet. I transitioned from bedside nursing to medical crisis consulting. It started as a side hustle, helping uninsured families negotiate 5-figure bills down to pennies on the dollar. I found loopholes, threatened PR nightmares for hospitals, and crowdfunded the rest. I became known in local whispers as the ER Angel, a name that made me laugh because I didn't feel like an angel. I felt like a reckoning. Eventually, I launched my own firm, Second Chance Ledger. It was a crisis and finance consultancy designed to help the desperate navigate the impossible. I used my parents' obsession with image as my business blueprint. I realized that in this world, truth doesn't matter as much as the story you tell. Narrative is currency. I became rich by saving people, but I was building an arsenal to destroy 3 specific targets. While my bank account grew, I watched them from the shadows. I created a burner social media account, a faceless void in the digital crowd, just to keep tabs on the perfect Jennings family. Publicly, Marcus and Denise were still flexing their brand of black excellence. There were photos of church awards, golf tournaments, and Lacey's seemingly idyllic life with Evan. But I knew how to look past the filters now. I saw the cracks they tried to airbrush away. The vacations stopped. The casual brunches at the club became infrequent. In the photos, Lacey looked thinner, her smiles tight and brittle, her hand gripping Evan's arm a little too possessively. Once Second Chance Ledger secured its first $1 million contract, I hired a private investigator. I didn't want contact. I wanted an autopsy of their life. I wanted to know if the rot I suspected was real. The report arrived on a rainy Tuesday, a thick manila envelope that sat on my mahogany desk like a loaded gun. I opened it and read the dismantling of my parents' facade. It was worse and better than I had imagined. Marcus had invested heavily in a restaurant franchise that had imploded. To keep up appearances, to pay the tithes and the country club dues, and maintain the Whitfield-level spending, he had taken out multiple lines of credit on the house. When those maxed out, he had quietly borrowed from the church building fund to cover the loan interest, moving money around in a shell game that was days away from collapsing. Denise wasn't faring better. She had been ambushed by bounced checks at charity luncheons, leading to a silent, devastating ostracism from the social circles she worshipped. And Lacey. Her fairy tale marriage was a sham. Evan was a serial cheater who ridiculed the Jennings family as new money fakes to his friends. Lacey knew it, but she clung harder, spending money they didn't have to look worthy of him. Then I turned to the summary sheet, and the air left my lungs. The investigator had itemized Marcus's immediate debts. To avoid a forensic audit by the church board, an audit that would lead to criminal embezzlement charges and prison time, he needed to repay the principal amount he had stolen. I stared at the number, blinking to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. $85,000. The universe has a dark sense of humor. 7 years ago, my parents decided $85,000 was too much to waste on Noah's heart. They sacrificed him for a wedding. Now that exact same number was the price of their freedom. It was the price of their legacy. I sat back in my leather chair, the rain drumming against the glass of my high-rise office. For the first time since I watched them lower my son into the ground, I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was cold and sharp. The universe didn't just keep receipts, it balanced them. And I was going to be the collection agent. The trap was set with the precision of a surgical strike. I rented a ground-floor apartment in a crumbling complex on the east side of town, a place where the drywall was thin and the sirens were constant. I furnished it with thrift store rejects and scattered past-due notices on the counter. Then I let a whisper slip through the family grapevine, planting a rumor with a chatty cousin that April had come into some money via a malpractice settlement and a lucky scratch-off ticket. As predicted, the scent of fresh cash drew the sharks. This brings us back to the knock at the door. I opened it wearing a baggy hoodie and no makeup, looking every inch the struggling, desperate daughter they remembered. Marcus and Denise stepped inside, and I watched their eyes dart around the cramped living room with undisguised revulsion. They refused to sit on the sofa. My father loosened his tie, sweat beading on his upper lip, and launched into a rehearsed speech about a temporary cash flow issue involving the dealership. They needed a short-term loan. The amount they requested was exactly $85,000. I stood there, arms crossed, letting the silence stretch. My mother, unable to contain her disdain, even while begging, looked at the peeling paint and then at me. "It's not like you have a family of your own anymore, April," she said, her voice dripping with that familiar poisonous sweetness. "What do you even need money for? This is a chance to help the people who raised you. It was a knife twist to the gut designed to remind me that my son was dead and I was alone. But I didn't bleed this time. I played the part. I widened my eyes, feigning fear and confusion. I told them my funds were locked in a trust that matured tomorrow, but I wanted to help. My boss is throwing an anniversary charity gala tomorrow night. I lied, my voice wavering perfectly. I'm supposed to give a speech about overcoming adversity. If you come, I can present the donation there. The church board would see it. It would show everyone how united we are. The bait was irresistible. They didn't just want the money, they wanted the glory. They wanted to be seen as the benevolent parents accepting a tribute from their grateful daughter. They agreed instantly. The next night, the ballroom of the Grand Hyatt was glittering with the city's elite hospital executives, local politicians, and thanks to my assistant's diligent work, the entire deacon board of their Atlanta church. Marcus, Denise, Lacey, and Evan arrived in a rented limousine, strutting into the venue with their chins high. I watched from the wings as their confidence faltered. They realized quickly that this wasn't a small office party. This was a power move. When the MC took the podium, the lights dimmed. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Second Chance Ledger, the woman who has saved thousands of families from financial ruin, April Jennings. The spotlight hit me. I walked out in a tailored silk suit that cost more than their car, looking directly at my parents in the front row. The shock on their faces was visceral, a slow-motion car crash of confusion and dawning horror. They had no idea I was successful. They had no idea I was the boss. I smiled cold and sharp and invited my beloved family to join me on stage. They scrambled up, blinded by the lights, assuming they were about to be praised. Marcus even grabbed the mic, launching into an improvised sermon about raising resilient children and supporting family dreams. I gently took the microphone back. Thank you, Father. I said, my voice amplified and steady. Let's talk about what my parents really sacrificed. I clicked a remote in my hand. Behind us on the massive projection screen, a document appeared. It was the hospital estimate for Noah's heart surgery, dated 7 years ago. The text was legible to everyone in the room, out of pocket $85,000. Declined by family sponsor. 7 years ago. I said, the room falling deathly silent. My parents decided that $85,000 was too much to invest in my son's life. I clicked the remote again. A split screen appeared. On one side, Noah's funeral notice. On the other, a series of invoices from Lacey's wedding vineyard venue, $45,000. Fireworks, $12,000. Custom flower wall, $8,000. The total exceeded $200,000. While I stood alone at my son's grave, I narrated, looking at Lacey, who was trembling. My mother posted on Instagram that it was the most important day of her life. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I signaled the stagehands and they rolled out a novelty check sized for the cameras. It was written for $85,000. My parents looked at it, their eyes wet with a mix of greed and terror, still thinking they might get the money to save themselves from prison. Then I uncapped a thick marker. In the pay to the order of line, I wrote in bold, slashing letters, "The Noah Jennings Heart Fund." This money, I declared, staring into my father's soul, is going to children whose families can't or won't help them. Children like my son. It will never go to the people who chose flowers over his heartbeat. The crowd erupted in murmurs of horror and disgust. Evan physically recoiled from Lacey, pulling his arm from hers. The church board members were whispering furiously, pointing at Marcus. "But I didn't forget you," I said, clicking to the final slide. It was a scanned legal document. "You didn't just threaten my life when you let Noah die. You tried to erase me. Tonight I erase the illusion you built." The screen showed the purchase agreement for their delinquent loans, the mortgage, the credit lines, the business debt. Second Chance. Ledger had bought it all. "I own your debt." I told them, my voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone caught like thunder. "And I've already declared it in default. Oh, and the church, I sent them the embezzlement files this morning." As the color drained completely from Marcus's face, the double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. Men in windbreakers marked FBI stepped into the light, moving straight for the stage. The arrest happened in a blur of motion that felt strangely slow, like a nightmare finally breaking into the waking world. The FBI agents moved with practiced efficiency, flanked by uniformed officers who ascended the stage stairs. Marcus, a man who had spent his life curating an aura of untouchable authority, crumbled instantly. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the sound was amplified by the microphone. He had dropped a sharp metallic snap that echoed through the silent ballroom. Denise didn't freeze. She lunged. She clawed at the agent's sleeves before turning her feral gaze on me. She screamed a raw, ugly sound that had no place in high society, shouting that I was ungrateful, that I was a monster, that I was killing my own father. Her voice cracked as she shrieked, "You did this! You're destroying us!" I leaned into the podium mic one last time, my voice calm against her hysteria. "No, mother. You killed my son. I'm just reading the bill." The crowd, composed of the very people whose approval my parents craved, turned their backs in unison. It was a social execution, swift and total. The church deacons, the hospital administrators, the wealthy socialites, they all looked away, sipping their drinks, erasing Denise Jennings from their world before she had even left the room. The chaos spilled into the lobby. I followed at a distance, watching the final act of Lacey's marriage disintegrate near the valet stand. Evan was red-faced, furiously typing on his phone, likely calling his lawyers to salvage his own reputation. When Lacey reached for him sobbing, he physically recoiled. "Don't touch me," he hissed loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "You and your family are monsters. I'm done." He got into a taxi alone, leaving her stranded on the plush carpet. Lacey saw me standing by the elevators and ran over, her mascara streaming in black rivulets down her face. She grabbed my arm, her grip desperate. "April, please. You're my sister. You can't just erase me like this. You can't leave me with nothing." I looked at her hand on my arm, the same hand that had held a champagne flute while my son took his last breath. "You watched them erase Noah," I said quietly, pulling my arm free. "You helped. You chose the party, Lacey. Now the party is over." I walked out into the cool night air, leaving her weeping in the lobby of a hotel she could no longer afford. 3 days later, I sat in my car parked across the street from the house I grew up in, the sprawling brick colonial in Atlanta that Marcus had mortgaged his soul to keep. It was raining, a gray drizzle that slicked the pavement. I watched as the movers carried out the furniture, the velvet sofas, the oil portraits, the mahogany dining table where we had eaten silent, image-obsessed dinners. I legally owned the property now. Second Chance Ledger had foreclosed on the deed the moment the loans went into default. The house, once a fortress that kept me out, was mine to do with as I pleased. I had briefly considered moving in, claiming it as a trophy, but looking at it now, I felt nothing but cold detachment. It was a mausoleum of lies. I would sell it and funnel every cent of the profit into the foundation. On the curb, surrounded by a few pitiful boxes of personal effects, stood Denise and Lacey. They looked small and wet, stripped of the status that had been their armor. They were truly powerless. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't honk. I just watched until the moving truck pulled away, leaving them standing in the rain. The final severance came a week later. My phone rang with an unknown number. It was Lacey calling from a prepaid phone. Her voice was thin, stripped of all arrogance. She asked to stay with me in Nashville just for a while until she got back on her feet. She tried the old key, the one that used to work. "You can't do this, April. We're family." I closed my eyes, remembering the hospital chapel, the silence of the grave, and the exact moment they stopped being my family. I didn't scream. I didn't gloat. I simply spoke the truth. "You all chose to sacrifice me and my son for your image," I said. "I've just given you what you gave me, freedom. You're free of me, and I'm free of you." I hung up the phone and immediately dialed my carrier to change my number. The line went dead, and the silence that followed was heavy, not with grief, but with peace. My last stop before heading back to Nashville was the cemetery. It looked different now. The patch of earth where Noah slept was no longer a barren, overlooked plot. A beautiful, polished granite headstone stood there, funded by my own success. I knelt in the grass and placed a small plastic triceratops next to the stone. Beside it, I laid a laminated photo of a laughing 4-year-old girl, the first child whose heart surgery had been fully paid for by the Noah Jennings Heart Fund. I spoke to the stone, softly telling him about the billboards that now bore his name, about the nurses and neighbors who donated $5 at a time, about the community that had rallied around his memory. This was the real American dream, not the hoarding of wealth, but the extending of a hand. As I stood up, I felt a shift in my chest. For years, I had been fueled by a nuclear-grade rage, a need to burn my parents' world to ash. But standing there, I realized the fire had done its job. The ash was cold. I thought I wanted to erase them, I whispered to the wind. Turns out, I just needed to stop letting them write my story. I drove back to Nashville at dusk, the city skyline glowing purple and gold ahead of me. I turned the radio down, preferring the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I thought about the word family. I had lost the one I was born into, but I had built another through my staff, the donors, and the children whose lives I had touched. My parents tried to erase me. Instead, I erased the version of myself that needed them. They sacrificed me to protect their world. I sacrificed their world to protect his memory. And now, finally, I'm free. April Jennings finally found a peace that wasn't possible in the life her parents tried to force upon her. If this chilling story of betrayal and calculated justice resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. Tell us in the comments what you thought of April's final move. We read every single one of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.